Hello all, hope you're having a great day today. Today we are talking about risk management. This is chapter 4. So there are 3 important areas of responsibility for a sport organization. The sport organization's first responsibility is to provide a safe environment for participants. This means having policies and standards that promote safe programs in safe facilities overseen by qualified personnel and trained volunteers. The sport organization's second responsibility is to make decisions fairly, especially decisions that affect members. This means having and following proper policies and procedures when making important decisions and handling disputes among members. The sport organization's third responsibility is to properly care for and protect its assets and resources, including money, equipment, facilities, and intangible property such as data, corporate image, and marketing rights. Failing to meet any one of these responsibilities can lead to unwanted consequences, some of which have a legal aspect. End of this chapter, you should be able to define risk and risk management and outline key risk issues and types of risks, as well as identify concrete methods for minimizing risk. Be able to apply risk reduction techniques elucidated in the chapter. So risk is defined as a situation or probability involving exposure to danger. Risk is the possibility of something bad happening and involves uncertainty about the effects, the implications of an activity with respect to something that humans value, such as health, well-being, wealth, property, or the environment, often focusing on negative, undesirable consequences. Exposure to the possibility of loss, injury, or other adverse or welcome circumstance, a chance, or a situation involving such a possibility. The understanding of risk, the most common methods of management, the measurements of risk, and even the definition of risk differ in different practice areas. There are a lot of different practice areas such as business risk, environmental risk, financial risk, health, safety, and environmental risk, as well as information technology risk, insurance, project risk, safety, and security. There are 4 broad categories of risk. The first one is public liability that's caused by negligence. And this is a failure to provide a reasonably safe environment, where public liability is part of the law of tort, which focuses on civil wrongs. An applicant or the injured party usually sues the respondent or the owner or occupier under common law based on negligence and or damages. Claims are usually successful when it can be shown that the owner or occupier was responsible for an injury. Therefore, they breached their duty of care. The duty of care is very complex, but in basic terms, it is the standard by which one would expect to be treated, whilst one is in the care of another. Once a breach of duty of care has been established, an action brought in a common law court would most likely be successful based on the injuries and the losses of the applicant. The court would award a financial compensation package. Now, public liability excluding negligence is where individuals are affected by the practices of the personnel within the facility. There are exclusion clauses that can take a variety of forms. Rather than expressly excluding liability, some clauses seek to limit the type of loss, which is recoverable, or the remedies available. A clause used to protect the organization when individuals are affected by the practices of the personnel within the facility. It is not possible to exclude or restrict liability for death or personal injury resulting from negligence. In the case of other loss or damage resulting from negligence, which would be financial loss or property damage, liability can be restricted, but only insofar as the term or notice satisfies the reasonableness test, which is explained later. An exclusion or limitation clause is only enforceable if it has been incorporated into the relevant contract. A common way of apportioning risk in a contract is for the parties to exclude or risk restrict their liability to one another in the event of default. Such exclusions can take a number of forms. Some clauses seek to exclude liability altogether. Others put a limit on liability, perhaps by capping the amount payable in damages on a breach, restricting the types of loss recoverable or the remedies available, or imposing a short time limit for claims. With business operations, this would be business interruptions or property loss, contractual issues, or employee health. Operational risk is the risk of losses caused by flawed or failed processes, policies, systems, or events that disrupt business operations. Employee errors, criminal activity such as fraud, and physical events are among the factors that can trigger operational loss. Most organizations accept that their people and processes will inherently incur errors and contribute to ineffective operations. In evaluating operational risk, practical remedial steps should be emphasized to limit exposure and ensure successful responses. If left unattended, the incurrence of operational risk can cause monetary loss, competitive disadvantage, employee or customer-related problems, and business failure. And then property exposures such as natural fire, disasters, vandalism, terrorism, and theft. Property loss exposure is associated with both real property such as buildings and personal property such as automobiles and the contents of the building. A property is exposed to losses because of accidents or catastrophes such as floods or hurricanes. Owners face the possibility of both direct and indirect or consequential losses. If a car is damaged in a collision, the direct loss is the cost of repairs. The indirect losses may include time taken to get the car repaired or work hours lost in getting bids and car repairs. If a firm experiences a fire in its warehouse, the direct cost is the cost of rebuilding and replacing inventory. Consequential or indirect losses are non-physical losses, such as a loss of income during the rebuilding process, and continuing expenses, such as the need to keep paying key employees while the business does not bring in revenue. Indirect losses also include the time and effort required to arrange for repairs, the loss of use of the warehouse during the repairs, and the additional cost of temporary facilities. So if we look at the types of losses or types of risk, you can see facilities, those are your buildings, your fields, your office, or other venues where sport and related activity occur. Other would be equipment. It includes equipment used by athletes, coaches, and the officials when the sport activity itself, and equipment used by the organization in the provision of sport services and programs. The program, there are physical risks that are an inherent part of the physical sport itself, some of which are desirable and thus reasonable while others are not. And then people, this is the human element and includes participants, staff, volunteers, directors, and spectators, all of whom can be unpredictable in their behavior and can make mistakes in carrying out their duties. The three main types of risk for a sport organization are physical injury. This is the risk that a participant will be seriously hurt. Wrongful actions. This is the risk that an individual will experience a loss of rights or opportunities for which there is a legal remedy and for which the sport organization is responsible. Property loss or damage. This is the risk that a property owned or controlled by the sport organization or for which the organization is responsible will be stolen or damaged and will need to be replaced. The second step of the risk management process is to measure the risks that have been identified in terms of their potential seriousness. The seriousness of any particular risk depends on both its frequency, which is a measure of how often it might occur, and its severity, a measure of its consequences and if it does occur. After the April 2013 Boston Marathon attack, the industry turned its attention to lessons learned from that incident and to make adjustments or consider both for open space events like running or bicycle races and It sought specific lessons learned from large venues that had experience dealing with broad open spaces similar to the environment of the marathon, such as NASCAR and professional golf. At least 130 people were killed and almost 400 injured in suicide bombings and shootings at several venues, including a football stadium in Paris on November 13, 2015. Sporting events around the world have become a target of choice for extremists. For terrorists, the ultimate goal is to carry out their schemes in crowded areas so as to maximize the number of victims. Sport facilities, considered by many as safe havens and symbols of national identity, are understandably preferred target for radicals. Sporting events are also appealing targets for an emotional point of view, as they are places where people frequently go to relax and enjoy themselves and feel safe surrounded by thousands of people enjoying a similar experience. By threatening such festive events, terrorists seek to upend this notion, putting fear in the hearts of ordinary people that prevents them from going to these happenings or attending any large public assemblies. The outcome is some degree of societal paralysis. Terrorism has far-reaching implications on social, psychological, and political levels. Sporting attacks on athletic personalities or events may also seriously affect the reputation of the political leadership, ultimately undermining the state or the government's authority. So with this, you conduct a baseline risk assessment and design a scalable security program. You hire, vet, and train a security workforce, manage communications, hire and train staff constantly, and repeatedly measure the effectiveness of the security program. It requires organization and information management, making sure that you have radios, telephone, television monitors, and posted signage, as well as text messaging and social media feeds. Cybersecurity, making sure that your patrons' contact and payment information is safe. Parking structures, your public transportation and vendors and service providers are in attendance of all of this and in consideration with your security processes. And facility access and evacuation, as well as cameras and emergency fire and security personnel that are included in with frontline security. In any sporting event, from the local competition to mega events such as the Olympic Games, risk is pervasive, both in the preparation and performance during the event. Risk management is a sound framework to minimize the potential and severity of the risk. It is the systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices to the tasks of establishing the context, identifying, analyzing, evaluating, monitoring, and communicating risks. Risk management in sports is all about identifying and evaluating, controlling, and managing the threats to the organization. It covers managing risk within sports facilities, events, teams, and creating a safe environment for participants, staff, spectators, and other stakeholders. Some questions to consider are: how many times did you exercise minimizing risks in the past year? And how long does it take to empty your stadium? What is the length of the longest line at your security check? Other times, the best metrics are simply yes or no, but with the need to expand on a yes answer. For example, are your risk assessments revised depending upon the type of event, upon the time of year? If yes, then how? And are there any technical tools or professional resources used to do the risk assessments, and if so, which ones? There are many benefits of good risk management, and those are better sporting or recreational outcomes, improved safety for participants, officials, spectators, and volunteers, lower costs and increased budget certainty, more effective management of assets, events, programs, and activities, improved compliance with the law, regulations, and other formal requirements, an enhanced image and reputation. Failing to meet any one of these responsibilities can lead to unwanted consequences, some of which have a legal aspect. that could be something to the effect of an injury to a participant that can lead to a lawsuit that will cost the organization money and time, and very possibly higher future insurance costs. It could also be poor conflict management that can lead to lawsuits that will take an emotional toll on individuals, as well as cost money and take time. Even if legal action isn't the result of bad decisions, these disputes will harm important relationships, burn out volunteers, and tarnish an organization's goodwill and public image. Finally, failure to take care of assets, whether tangible assets such as physical property or intangible assets such as intellectual property, is simply bad business management, and this in turn can have harmful financial and legal consequences. Any one of these incidences, whether an injury, a dispute about a decision making, or a loss of property, will cost a sport organization money and other valuable resources, which means fewer of these are available for the sport organization's most important business, providing program opportunities to participants. There are 3 practical steps in risk management, and these never change. Identify, measure, and control. The first step in any risk management exercise is thus to identify the major areas of risk facing the sport organization. These risk areas in insurance circles, they are known as loss exposures, can be defined as potential events or occurrences that lead to ultimately to financial loss for the organization, either through liability losses resulting from the sport organization being successfully sued. It could be damage to property, either the sport organization's own property or the property of others, which the sport organization has a responsibility. Loss of revenue or earnings, and loss of key personnel, such as volunteers, or loss of public image. You want to define and determine risk criteria for your project or your sport. No 2 risks and no 2 risk matrices are alike, which means you'll need to work with your project team and key stakeholders to find and determine the risk criteria you'll use to evaluate each risk you've identified. Remember that 2 intersecting criteria need to be specified, each with its levels, the probability or likelihood that the risk will occur, and the severity of impact the risk will have. So that second step is risk analysis and determining what the categories of the levels of risks are and how likely it's to occur and what are the consequences associated with the risk. And then with risk identification, which is step 1, evaluating your environment, your structures, your marketplace to determine the source of risk. And you do that oftentimes by doing an audit of the facility, an event, and identify your key risk or safety. So put more succinctly, your risk management is an organized process of asking the following questions about a sport program, facility, or event. What are the possible things that can go wrong? And this is that task of identifying risks in step 1, and how likely it is that these things will go wrong, and what are the consequences if they do. That's the task of measuring risks. And what can we do to keep things from going wrong? That's the task of controlling risks. A risk assessment matrix, which is sometimes called a risk control matrix, is a tool used during the risk assessment stage of project planning. It identifies and captures the likelihood of project risk and evaluates the potential damage or interruption caused by those risks. It's part of that. You're going to do a qualitative analysis in which you evaluate the occurrence and the probability. It's determined preferably based on experience, the progress of the project, or else by speaking to a risk expert, and is on a scale of 1 to 99%. When you evaluate the impact severity, you're assessing the overall impact. It is necessary to estimate the severity of each of the impacts defined at the project level. A scale is used to classify the different impacts and their severities. That ensures that the assessment of the risk and opportunity is standardized and reliable. The criticality level of a risk or opportunity is obtained by the equation of looking at your criticality times the impact and the probability of an event happening. So it's the product of probability, and impact. The purpose of the quantitative assessment is to ensure that the risk management team prioritizes the response on critical items first. So this is an example of a risk matrix chart for a high school football game. And you can see in the orange text that indicates an intolerable risk level. Those things are not acceptable and need to be prevented at all costs. The purple text indicates tolerable risk level. And the green text indicates something that's acceptable to some degree. So after you've identified and described all of the potential risks, the next step is to analyze them. In your analysis, use your risk criteria to categorize each risk within its appropriate severity level and probability. Oftentimes that means doing a cost-benefit analysis, or CBA, that's commonly applied as a tool for deciding on risk protection. With CBA, one can identify risk mitigation strategies that lead to an optimal trade-off between the cost of the mitigation measures and the achieved risk reduction. CBA is also applied to assess the effect of policies and regulations, for example, on terrorist prevention measures and on retrofitting of buildings. And practical applications of CBA, the strategies are typically evaluated through efficiency indicators such as the benefit cost ratio, or BCR, and the marginal cost criterion, or MC. CBA is limited by its focus on the economic efficiency of risk protection measures. Many aspects, such as the value of human life or environmental and social impacts of measures, cannot be easily quantified in monetary terms for inclusion in CBA. This is of particular relevance when the overall budget for risk reduction measures is limited and an optimal allocation of resources among different subsystems is necessary. CBA is often implemented through the calculation of efficiency measures such as the benefit and cost ratio and marginal cost criterion. The aim is to find an optimal combination of protection strategies in individual subsystems, such as your administrative units, and minimizing the sum of risk and cost at the system level, which could be the state. One objective of the risk evaluation is to establish a financial evaluation of a risk's impact on an opportunity's benefit should it occur. These amounts represent a potential additional cost or potential profit if we're talking about an opportunity, not anticipated in the project budget. For this, it is therefore necessary to evaluate the additional cost incurred by financially reviewing hours of additional payroll, additional work or programming to do, amendments and or claims made to contracts, etc. So to calculate the cost of undesired events consequences by adding these values. This step will make it possible to estimate the need for additional budget for risks and opportunities of the project. A risk assessed management plan or RAMP, is a document that describes a liquor licensee's management practices and procedures at their licensed premises. The purpose of a RAMP is to outline how a licensee will manage their premises to minimize harm caused by alcohol abuse and misuse at sporting events. So you want to consider the following basic guidelines when you're planning an event with alcohol. Number one, review local and state laws regarding the sale and consumption of alcohol. You may need to obtain a special license or permit to serve alcohol during your event or confirm that the venue or caterers are properly authorized to do so. Confirm with the prospective venue or property owner that serving alcohol is permitted and ask about any additional requirements that may be necessary, such as a licensed bartender or caterer, a security service tasked with checking identification, controlling general venue access, and the time for last call. Evidence of general liability insurance that includes host liquor liability and or standalone liquor liability insurance policy. Consider serving only beer and wine, not liquor or cocktails. And keep in mind the potential for workers' compensation injuries at a company-hosted event. Use effective signage and enforce controls. So place prominent signage at the venue entrance stating the rules about general personnel conduct and alcohol. Inside your event, clearly visible signs about identification and drink limits will limit will help servers adhere to the policies you've established. Consider providing a set number of tickets per guest or attendee or a 2-drink maximum. Always offer non-alcoholic alternatives and always serve food, more than snacks. Develop controls with all vendors to ensure underage and intoxicated guests aren't served. Consider limiting your guests to people 21 and older. Clearly state any age restriction in the promotions, tickets, or event invitations. And during the event, be sure all entrances are staffed by your staff, volunteers, or hired security service. Verify tickets and invitees. Have qualified ID checkers for anyone who looks under the age of 30 and do not allow any exceptions. If minors are welcome at the event, require that people who wish to drink wear wristbands upon age verification. Restrict consumption to a designated area for large events with younger attendees. And handle intoxicated guests with care. Companies may be held liable should a guest injure a third party after. Despite your best efforts, you may need to deal with a drunk employee or guest and mitigate the risk they may pose to themselves or others. Prior to the event, develop a clear strategy to prevent and address this situation and share it amongst the key organizers and vendors. Suggestions include encourage the caterer or bartender to use full discretion in cutting off any intoxicated persons. Better yet, a 2-drink or 1 per hour of the event. Policy allows a server to simply reference the policy and minimize any disputes. Hire a security service for your event. And if any intoxicated guest becomes disruptive or unruly, designated staff should quietly ask them to leave the event space. Set a last call 1 hour before the event ends, and serve more food and non-alcoholic drinks towards the end of your event. Ensure any intoxicated guests make it home safely from your event. You want to promote safe transportation for your attendees, so most of an organization's risk begins once the holiday party ends. A guest driving after your event is the single largest risk associated with hosting an event with alcohol. According to the NHTSA, every day 32 people die in the United States from drunk driving crashes. There were 11,624 preventable deaths in 2020 alone. The primary risk management goal of every event must be to prevent drunk driving. Suggestions include discourage employees and guests from driving to the event venue. Arrange for transportation to and from the event. Without personal vehicles nearby, the risk of departing guests driving drunk can be reduced. Make advanced arrangements with a local cab company ride-sharing service for free or reduced fare rides. And major ride-sharing companies have programs for arranging rides for company events. If guests may drive to the venue, encourage designated drivers by providing them with free non-alcoholic beverages, food, door prizes, or specific incentives, and consider asking for volunteers to commit prior to the event. Do not allow an employee who is under the influence to leave the event behind the wheel. While this can feel difficult at times, preventing the consequences of an accident involving an employee who becomes intoxicated at your event is worth the discomfort. If overnight lodging is provided by the site is not within walking distance, provide shuttles for transportation. Do not provide uncontrolled shuttle transportation to a parking lot where the employee will simply get into their car and drive away. Provide designated drivers with a wristband for easy identification. And encourage public transit if practical, and provide information to guests about transportation options available. Have event staff provide transportation assistance to anyone who may need help, and allow discretion of event staff in arranging for local lodging if necessary. You want to prioritize the risks and make an action plan. Your final step is to prioritize the risks and create risk management plans to mitigate or neutralize them, with your risk categorized accordingly. You'll want to outline the steps you'll take if the risk does occur and the strategies you'll deploy to help get the project back on track. There are 5 basic techniques of risk management. The first of those is avoidance, retention, loss prevention and reduction, and then transfer through insurance and contracts. So avoidance, many times it is not possible to completely avoid risk, but the possibility should not be overlooked. Risk avoidance means you are trying to avoid compromising events as a way to eliminate liability exposures. Risk reduction is a way to help you control the damages to your business, like claims or losses. With risk avoidance, small business owners won't run their company in a way that puts them at a specific risk. So to reduce risk and avoid potential losses, you decide not to offer those kinds of services. Risk retention. At times, based on the likely frequency and severity of the risk presented, retaining the risk or portion of the risk may be cost effective, even through other methods of handling the risk are available. For example, retaining the risk of loss to fences, signs, gates, and light poles because of the difficulty of enumerating and evaluating all of these types of structures. So when losses occur, the cost of repair is absorbed by the maintenance budget, except for those situations involving the negligence of a third party. Although insurance is available, the organization retains the risk of loss to personal property. In loss prevention and reduction, when risk cannot be avoided, the effect of loss can often be minimized in terms of frequency and severity. For example, encouraging the use of security devices on certain audiovisual equipment to reduce the risk of theft. In the case of transfer, some cases can be transferred to others, usually by contract. When an outside organization uses your facility for a public event, they must provide evidence of insurance and name the organization as an additional insured under their policy, thereby transferring the risk of the event from the organization to the facility user. The purchase of insurance is also referred to as a risk transfer, since the policy actually shifts the financial risk of loss contractually from the insured entity to the insurance company. Insurance should be the last option and used only after all other techniques have been evaluated. And contracts. Often vendors and service providers will attempt through a contract to release themselves from all liability for their actions related to the contract. These are often referred to as hold harmless or indemnification clauses. Due to the complexity of interpreting these provisions, it's recommended that you have a delegated contracting authority through your organization contracts department or independent individual or organization to review and advise. Basically, what they do is they review contracts and agreements and identify and assess risks, evaluate insurance standards, and review hold harmless and indemnification provisions. Often, this requires a certificate of insurance, but also an endorsement. Collecting these documents is often a time-consuming aspect of the contracting process, but can be very important. With risk retention, it is the process where an individual or company accepts the financial risk and does not act on them before they actually occur. These risks may be too small for which paying attention before could be too early. Some other risks are so big that taking any action on them is impossible due to the costs. So risk retention strategies do not depend on insurance. The reason for that is that the long-term cost of insurance is more than the cost of the risks when it occurs. Therefore, the company saves substantially from risk retention. In case insurance is put in place, the premiums outweigh the actual cost of risks. This is so because the risk profile considered for an individual company is different from the individual average values used while calculating the premiums. The downside of risk retention is that risk retentions are fully dependent on the manager's decision rather than on the market perspective. Therefore, there is a chance of increased losses in case of risk retention rather than any other way of mitigating. Apart from the risks considered and insured, any other financial losses are considered to be accepting risks. This increases the portfolio of risks that are unforeseen. And here you see a waiver of release. A waiver of release is the intentional and voluntary act of relinquishing something, such as known right to sue a person, an educational institution or organization for an injury. Waivers and releases are commonly used by the sponsor of an event, like for a marathon, and schools when competitors, students, faculty, or visitors participating in a private or institution-sponsored activity. The term waiver is sometimes used to refer to a document that is signed before any damages actually occur. A release is sometimes used to refer to a document that is executed after an injury has occurred. A waiver can be an effective way for a person or educational institution or organization to inform students, parents, event participants, and family members of the risks involved in various activities and to shield the person, institution, or organization from liability. The best releases explain the risks of a particular activity or program in detail. So even if all aspects of a release are not upheld in court, you can show that the release party was informed about the specific risk and should be responsible for his or her own conduct. Waivers, as described above, often contain express assumption of risk language. This type of language describes the activity, states the signer has full understanding of the nature of the document, knows of the specified risks, and voluntarily chooses to assume the risk and agrees not to hold the institution liable for the consequences of his or her participation in the described activity. If the participant later is injured and brings a lawsuit, this language permits an organization, school, college, or university to maintain that the participant's signature shows he or she voluntarily took part in an activity with known risks and therefore should not receive damages. When outside entities or organizations use an institution's facilities, such as a school's track or cross-country course, the institution may try to limit its liability exposure by having participants sign a hold harmless agreement. This document is a promise by one party not to hold the other party responsible for any costs or claims that may result from a loss that results from the subject matter of the agreement. In the case of a caveat, courts do not always uphold waivers and releases. Some courts have upheld releases and waivers. The courts really vary in their approach to releases depending on the particular facts of each case, the releases' effect on their statutes and laws, and the court's views of the benefits of releases as a matter of public policy. Courts do not permit institutions to waive their responsibility when they have exercised gross negligence or misconduct that is intentional or criminal in nature. Such an agreement would be deemed to be against public policy because it would encourage dangerous and illegal behavior. Waivers are often found on the backside of ticket stubs for sporting and entertainment events. Most fans do not read these waivers. Many are not even aware of the existence of the waiver on the back. Defendants will often raise as a defense to a negligence claim that such language should relieve them from liability. Generally, these waivers are virtually unenforceable since there was no intent on the part of the fan to agree to such terms. Also at issue is the lack of informed consent, and the courts have traditionally refused to impose such waivers on fans as a matter of public policy. In areas such as Little League sports or even amusement park rides, waivers are often signed by parents of a minor to avoid liability or give up the right to sue in the event of an accident that causes injuries. The law is unclear as to whether parents who sign waivers on behalf of their children will release a potential defendant from liability to the minor. The trend is to enforce such waiver arrangements signed by parents on behalf of a child. However, it is quite possible that a court could refuse to enforce such a waiver, especially for gross negligence or recklessness. A court does have the option of not enforcing a waiver signed by the minor or parent. Such cases should be analyzed on a case-by-case basis, paying close attention to the particular state's common law interpretations of waivers. Types of insurance coverages for events. Each type of event is unique and each one entails different risks. Different types of event insurance are available to protect you. And so oftentimes you'll look at special event insurance or professional liability, business equipment protection, event cancellation, workers' comp, and terrorism, along with the types of insurances that you see here. So special event insurance is a type of liability insurance that protects you against the financial consequences of claims related to organizing or participating in an event. For example, if your party guest slips on the dance floor and hurts their arm, event liability could protect you if they take legal action. There is event insurance that includes both general liability insurance and liquor liability coverage. A general liability insurance is one that anyone planning a business event needs general liability insurance. This type of insurance policy shields your company from claims of negligence in response to third-party accidents, including bodily injury and property damage. Imagine that a platform at your event collapses, sending some attendees to the hospital. If they sue you for bodily injury, general liability insurance could help cover the cost of their medical care and provide your legal defense. Also, general liability insurance may cover you if loss or damage occurs to attendees' property or to the premises you've rented for the event. Liquor liability insurance, from company holiday parties to anniversary celebrations, alcohol is often a staple at special events. If this applies to your party, liquor liability insurance is a must-have. Few factors increase risk liabilities as much as booze, as we talked about. Fortunately, liquor liability insurance is included as part of your event insurance. If a client has one too many highballs and slips on the floor and breaks a hip, you could get served papers. Liquor liability coverage will cover you if you're held accountable for damages caused by alcohol-related accidents. Note that if you're in the business of selling alcohol, you will need to add retail liquor liability coverage to your policy. And note that special event insurance is only meant for certain types of short-term gatherings and celebrations such as weddings, fundraisers, religious ceremonies, company events, charity events, baby showers, birthday parties, and quinceañeras. Professional liability insurance, also known as errors and omissions insurance, protects professionals when their clients claim that they lost money because you don't do your job correctly. If you are an event planner and the caterer fails to show, your client may sue you, claiming it was your fault that they lost out on a big deal that was meant to be closed over the surf and turf. In instances like this, professional liability insurance provides your legal defense as well as the settlement costs for covered claims. Business equipment protection. If you have equipment that your business owns or rents and you transport it to the event, this particular protection will cover the cost for repair or replacement if it is accidentally lost or damaged. If you're a wedding MC and a guest knocks over your karaoke machine while doing her best diva impersonation, you won't have to pay out of pocket for a new one. Event cancellation insurance. You never know if a performer will get sick and drop out at the last minute, causing you to cancel the event. Bad weather could shut down a music festival. A power outage could cancel a concert. All of these unforeseeable incidents could cause catastrophic damage to your bottom line. A cancellation insurance policy would help recover non-refundable deposits or reimburse guests for their tickets. Event cancellation policies protect you from lost revenue or other expenses in the following circumstances: unforeseen weather conditions, power failure, performer cancellation, performer abandonment, postponement, interruption, relocation, and terrorism. It is important to note that workers' compensation, even a celebrity event planner can't pull off a party alone. You're likely to employ full or part-time workers to manage your event, which means you may legally be obligated to purchase workers' compensation. Texas would be excluded from that. Otherwise, should an accident occur to one of your employees, slips, sprains, strains, or any other injuries, your business could be exposed. With workers' comp, the employees are protected from their lost wages and medical costs associated with on-the-job injuries during an event. And as a small business, you're protected from the medical expenses associated with these kinds of injuries. It is an insurance policy that can help both employer and employee when a workplace accident occurs. And then terrorism insurance. Although it may be unlikely that such a nightmare will occur, terrorism insurance is a little-known niche event policy that protects you from liability in the event of a terrorist attack. It is typically split into three types of coverages. Limited terrorism covers forced cancellation resulting from an act of terrorism within a specific vicinity of the event and within a certain time frame. Usually this is restricted to 50 miles in 50 days. Full terrorism covers forced cancellation arising from a terrorist act without limits. So, if an incident occurs on the East Coast, grounding all airplanes and impacting an event in the Northeast, terrorism insurance could cover the costs. And third, the political violence and terrorism covers terrorism, civil commotion, riot war, insurrection, strikes, and malicious damage. Risk monitoring is often used interchangeably with risk management. Risk monitoring is a step of the risk management process where companies must measure the success of their strategies to improve them. Organizations must first understand risk and deploy a risk strategy, but also monitor its results to adapt if it is needed. Risk monitoring and control refers to the process of continuously identifying risks and establishing the best methods of dealing with those risks. Risk monitoring and control begins at the start of projects when all potential and known risks are identified, and then, just as importantly, continues throughout a project as though initial risks are continuously tracked, while new risks are also identified as work continues and changes in progress. Risk monitoring is a crucial step where companies measure and review the efficiency of their risk strategies. It is a key component of the larger risk management framework and often leads to the creation of key risk indicators, or KRIs. Keep in mind that depending on the context, the risk monitoring definition tends to be expansive and can overlap with risk mitigation and risk management and other key processes. While business risk monitoring happens at the end of the risk management process, and as a result of it, it needs to be ongoing and reviewed often to ensure that appropriate risk responses are actioned in timely fashion. The risk monitoring processes can be overseen by the risk team, but it's also common for compliance teams, anti-fraud teams, or trust and safety teams to take that responsibility. Risk monitoring in an organization minimizes risk by identifying it and ensuring there are defenses sufficient to prevent it. It mitigates the effects of risks of various types by having procedures in place to take action once an event arrives. Provides a clear picture of the risk landscape, which in turn allows the company to be proactive rather than reactive. It promotes accountability by recording and defining clear steps to mitigation. And it creates transparency and inspires trust in staff and stakeholders. It also utilizes historical events, allowing you to learn from past failures to improve future mitigation, and allows for growth by minimizing loss to risk of various types, from natural disasters to fraud. So risk management or monitoring can be voluntary. These risk monitoring strategies are not required by law, but are carried out by companies to help them to learn from events which have occurred in the past. There are also obligatory risk monitoring in which the risk monitoring strategies are required by law for some organizations to ensure that proper risk monitoring and management methods are used. Could be for reassessment in the case of secondary or tertiary assessments of risk and risk management strategies. And oftentimes they are continual, meaning that monitoring is always ongoing. In order to perform risk monitoring, risk must be identified and evaluated. And once a risk action plan has been created, a timeline should also be created to ensure that checkups are done in a timely fashion. In order to monitor the implementation of actions, tick boxes may be used to check that each step of the process has been followed. Notes should be kept at every stage of the implementation and action processes so that these can be analyzed and referred to during the monitoring phase of the process. So where does risk monitoring fit into the risk management process? The monitoring process usually takes place once the risk action plan has been implemented, and as soon as the plan is in place, the monitoring phase may begin to assess the effects that the plan has on the risks in question. However, monitoring may also take place even if no formal plan has been put into place yet. For instance, monitoring the risk of a weather concern may occur whilst the team management team discusses what their preferred course of action would be should the weather risk actually occur. Risk monitoring is important because it helps to highlight whether strategies are effective or not. Risk monitoring can impact upon the management of organizational risk because it can lead to the identification of new risks. Strategies may also need to be changed or updated depending on the findings of risk monitoring strategies. For all companies and on all projects, risk monitoring and control is a constant battle and endeavor, and one which can always be improved. The risk monitoring and control is a really important project management activity because it enables companies to manage one of the most powerful forces in project management, risk. The overarching purpose of risk monitoring and control is to mitigate and eliminate the risk which could derail a project or impact a company. And within these broader goals, there are some more specific purposes, such as to make sure that the right and appropriate risk responses have and are being implemented as planned, to determine the validity of the assumptions which were made prior to projects and will likely be made again, to ensure risk responses actions are effective, and to identify risk triggers for now and in the future, to track and ensure that proper risk management and risk control procedures are followed, and to analyze trends and patterns in risk. Without proper risk monitoring and control, a company is powerless to understand how initial risk plans are going, as well as to respond quickly to the inevitable risks which arise during the course of projects. In terms of the theoretical tools which can be used for risk monitoring and control, we have risk audits and status and safety meetings, risk reassessments, and variance and trend analysis. While some companies have managed these processes manually, other companies streamline these processes using smart risk monitoring and control tools. An example of simple risk monitoring would be if there had been some unexpected weather forecast. Companies always monitor powerful external forces like these, and a slate of bad weather may require them to put in some additional controls around work and production rates, as well as workplace safety. These types of events are unforeseen circumstances happen hundreds of times on projects, and good risk monitoring and control can ensure that you are acting with appropriate corrective actions and control measures which will keep your projects on track and on budget. And these are my references. I thank you for joining me today and look forward to talking with you soon. Have a great day.